Yes.
Okay, it's time for the 158th edition of Hitting Left with the Klonsky Brothers. I'm Mike Klonsky here with my brother Fred, and coming at you on Lumpin' Radio, WLPN 105.5 FM in Chicago. And we're Zooming again today from our homes, and we've got a special guest hooked up with us, our friend and San Francisco DA, Chesa Boudin. How you guys doing today?
Doing all right, Mr. Klonsky and Mr. Klonsky. Good to see you both. Good to be with you. I wish I was there in person, but happy to, to be here remotely.
Well, glad to have you. Yeah.
I'll bet you never thought when you were running for district attorney, I'll bet you never anticipated anything like the challenges that you're facing now.
No way to predict or anticipate this kind of a pandemic and the effect it has on every aspect of life, especially for me, professionally, criminal justice. You know, we're in a space right now where everything that we kind of took for granted as the cornerstones of what we do in terms of jury trials and preliminary hearings and, in-person arraignments in criminal court, all that stuff has been turned on its head, and we're being forced to make really difficult decisions in a whole new context.
And how are you holding up under this stress?
I'm doing all right. I'm really lucky to have a great team. I'm really lucky to have the support of my wife and family in this period. And in some ways, these sorts of crises, really make us all appreciate the luxuries and the privileges that we do have much more acutely. And
one of the things that we've been talking about this on a weekly basis now, but one of the things we've talked about is the fact that it's laid bare all of those kind of contradictions and all of the problems that existed in society at large before the coronavirus hit. Do you think that's? I mean, I'm sure you think that that's true, but could you talk about that a little bit? Because really, the very issues that you ran on have been kind of even intensified now that you're in office.
No, that's right. We ran a campaign based on ending mass incarceration, based on an understanding and a clear, consistent articulation of the ways in which mass incarceration actually undermine public safety rather than enhance it. And this crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, has made even more clear and even more kind of current and present the ways in which mass incarceration undermines public safety. Look, right now, the single biggest threat to public safety is the coronavirus. And jails and prisons have the potential, as we've seen in Chicago with Cook County Jail, which was recently identified as the single largest vector for the spread of coronavirus anywhere in the country. Jails and prisons have the conditions that are absolutely perfect for forming an epidemic within the pandemic. And so it's incumbent on all district attorneys, on all folks committed to public safety, to find ways to safely reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. We need to do it not only for those people who are themselves incarcerated, but also for their families, and also for every single person that works in jails and prisons across the country who are at risk of being exposed to the virus and bringing it home to their families and their communities. Coronavirus is a very serious threat to public safety for all of us, but more than anyone else for the unhoused, the marginalized, and the incarcerated.
And for you, this is a personal issue as well. I mean, your dad, an old friend of ours, David Gilbert, is in prison now. He just turned 75 years old, I believe.
That's right.
What are the first of all, how is he doing? And secondly, what are the conditions like over there in he's in Wend, right?
He was in Wendy. He got moved back in December from Wendy to Shawangunk Correctional Facility.
Where's that, in upstate New York?
It's upstate New York, although it's closer to New York City than Wendy was. It's a couple hours north of the city,
all right.
Not far from the Hudson.
What are the conditions like for him over there? And what are the prospects for possible release?
Yeah, and let me just say, the United States has over 2 million people behind bars. My dad is one of those 2.2 million people. And so for me, as district attorney, I've got a job to do professionally. But for me as a son with an incarcerated father, I am feeling the anxiety and the fear, and the stress that every single family of every single incarcerated person in this country is feeling right now. We know firsthand that prison and jail make social distancing, good hygiene, and access to emergency medical care basically impossible. And we know that if and when the coronavirus hits the jails and prisons that our loved ones are incarcerated in, there will be very, very little that we can do or that they can do to keep themselves safe. Every single time my father comes to the phone to give me or my mother a call, he's literally taking his life in his own hands. He's 75 years old. He's got serious underlying medical conditions. And while he's lucky in that he lives in a prison that has single cell bunks, or single bunk cells, I should say, he does not share his cell with another person. He's not in a dorm or the way that many California prisons are massively overcrowded. And yet he is within 6 feet of neighbors on either side. All of their toilets are right up against a common corridor with no solid walls separating them. When they go eat in the mess hall, they have to eat meals prepared by other inmates. They have to sit next to other inmates. There's no meaningful way for them to keep themselves safe. And when my father was first transferred to Shawangunk back in December, I believe, there wasn't even a single doctor that worked on staff at that prison. Now there is, but the reality is there's no ability for the prison to provide the kind of medical care that's necessary if and when the virus starts spreading quickly through the population. Already at least one guard tested positive in his prison. We're hearing from other inmates in the prison, though not confirmed by the prison authorities, that several inmates have been evacuated from the prison with symptoms consistent with the coronavirus.
When they evacuate them, where do they go?
Well, initially they were taking them to local hospitals, but I've been told, again, not confirmed, but I've been told that local hospitals are now refusing to accept transfers from prisons, prioritizing instead people who are not incarcerated, and that as a result, they've retrofitted the gymnasium within the prison as a quarantine facility for up to 50 inmates who start showing symptoms. We see what's happening in New York with Rikers Island. Many people dying, some of them there just on technical violations. We see that looks like a mass grave is being dug by authorities on Hart Island in New York. These are really disconcerting developments. A friend of mine is a doctor on Rikers Island, and she has an op-ed in the Washington Post today, which I think is really spot on. When people die, especially in pretrial detention, while they're awaiting due process, when they die because of preventable diseases, that's not a system that we can call just.
How widespread is this situation of medical care and around the country and other prisons? You talked about New York. The situation in California fairly well, but is this common in prison situations around the U.S.?
Every single jail and every single prison in the United States is dealing with the potential for widespread death. Absolutely. It's an issue at federal prisons. It's an issue in every state. I'm in contact with my counterparts across the country. Jails, even more than prisons in some ways, are at risk because of the high volume of what we'll call churn. Under normal circumstances in San Francisco County Jail, for example, an average of about 45 people a day are booked into the jail. It's a revolving door. New people get arrested, other people get released. And that high volume of turnover means there's a real risk for people to bring the disease into the jail.
And those people are then leaving and entering into the general population. And because one of the questions that people ask is, why should aside from the moral obligation of taking care of people even when they're in prison, what is the threat to the community outside of prison? And it sounds like what you're describing is that we're turning out people who are very likely infected out into the general population.
Yeah, that's one part of it. But the thing to remember, some people then say, well, we should just keep everybody who's in jail in jail. and we should not let them out until this crisis passes. That's what some people say. The problem with that approach, other than the constitutional challenges it presents, is that, first of all, again, people do have a legal right to be released in many situations. They've served their sentence. They've been found not guilty. A judge orders that consistent with the Constitution. They're entitled to be released, et cetera. But the other problem is that in a place like San Francisco, we've got the 45 inmates, the people coming in and out on average a day. But we've got more than 200 staff members, sworn sheriff's deputies and civilian public health workers and social workers and other staff that help run the jails every day. So even if you freeze the jail population and don't let anybody out, you've still got about 5 times as many individuals coming in and out for their daily work who are all also getting exposed. And the more people you have in the jail, the more you let the population grow during this period, the more risk all of those people who work in the jail are taking for themselves and the families they go home to at night.
So you've reduced the inmate population in San Francisco jail by about 40%.
That's right.
And so now you have like 750. How many people are in the jail now?
It's down to about 735 as of this morning. We hit a new low this morning of 735.
And how did you do it? What did you do to reduce the population by such a significant amount?
Well, it was hard work, Mike, and it was work that in some cases should have been done before and without this crisis, having to force our hand. There's some people. I'll tell you, some individual cases that we found where you just ask yourself, why was this person in jail in the first place, right? We had a woman who's about to be a grandmother who is severely mentally ill, so mentally ill that she'd been conserved. She doesn't have meaningful criminal issues that are keeping her in jail. She's in jail because our public health system has failed to provide a long-term residential mental health treatment bed for her. And she was stuck waiting in jail. I took a look at the case and I reached out to our public health partners and I said, this woman does not belong in jail and I'm not going to keep her in jail under these circumstances and expose her and everyone else to an increased risk of COVID-19. Once I made that call, the public health officials moved quickly. They found her a long-term treatment bed in an appropriate mental health facility. We had another woman with no criminal history, incarcerated on a misdemeanor with a high-risk pregnancy. Why do we have a woman with a high-risk pregnancy in custody on a misdemeanor? So we got her out, we got her into a residential facility that's going to give her prenatal care and allow her to stay there until and after she gives birth. Those are the kinds of decisions that we should have made way before the COVID-19 epidemic hit. Then there's other people where we had to make harder decisions, and we're balancing the public safety risk of COVID-19 on the one hand, and the public safety risk of releasing people who do have a serious criminal history on the other. What we've done is work closely with our reentry partners, with our community-based organizations and the jail medical team to identify people who are high risk because of their age or underlying medical conditions, expedite them for release. To identify people with low-level charges, expedite them for release. Identify people who have cases we can resolve for probation and get them out of jail and on probation. Identify people who have technical violations of probation or parole, who are in custody because of a missed appointment or a positive marijuana test, which is frankly and sadly, the first person who died of COVID-19 in Rikers Island was only there because of a technical violation. We do not want short-term incarceration to turn into a death sentence.
Cook County Jail, as you pointed out, has become the nation's largest concentration point for COVID-19 now.
That's right.
Have you been talking or advising your counterpart here, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx? I know you two have met each other and know each other.
We are in close contact. I'm a big fan of State's Attorney Kim Foxx. I was really excited to see the outcome of her election. All of our offices are scrambling. We are working to share best practices and lessons learned with each other. I'm sure we all wish we had time to talk more often, but we are absolutely in communication. And State's Attorney Fox and I and a number of our other colleagues around the country, like Rachel Rollins in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, and many others, have regular phone calls where we get together, share challenges and lessons learned with each other.
But
Because
Matt,
we
it
go
does
ahead,
seem
Fred.
as though, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Fred.
Okay. It does seem as though that that your office in San Francisco and the political coalition that you've been able to put together has allowed you to take a more aggressive position in that city than we've seen in a lot of particularly urban centers. Is there a reason for that? I mean, what have you been able to do to move this agenda forward that other places don't seem to be able to do as well?
Well, there's a few different circumstances, Fred. I mean, one thing is San Francisco is a smaller city with a smaller jail and, a really progressive political base. But I think, in some ways, the smaller jail population makes it more challenging for us, and it's why the percentage numbers are more important than the raw numbers. The decrease of 40% is more than any other jurisdiction in the country. And we did that even though our jail population was already one of the lowest in terms of per capita comparisons with other counties. I think we've got a really robust reentry team that helps us plan safe reentry for people who otherwise might not be able to safely be released. And I think we've also got the benefit of the fact that I had already ended money bail. And so we already starting in January, we're not asking judges to impose bail. But we've seen some leadership from the California Supreme Court. We have a new series of emergency court orders that apply statewide that are helping us. And we've got a really good, productive partnership with the other justice partners, the Public Defender's Office, the jail reentry folks from the Department of Public Health, the courts. And I'll say the thing that, in many ways makes me the proudest about the changes we've made, Fred, are that not only have we reduced the jail population by 40%, but during that same period, crime has fallen by about 40%.
So I was going to ask you. So, Fred, let me ask you a question. How close are we to break time?
We have about 5 more minutes, and then Chesa, do you have some time to come back after the break and talk some more?
I can.
Yeah. Okay. So we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. So speaking of your the kind of coalition and relationships that you've been able to build there, Chesa, I saw a tweet today by the mayor, by London Breed, saying that you and her and I guess others have worked to secure apartment units for survivors of domestic violence there in the Bay Area.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, one of the things that's really important, Mike, to remember is that the threats and the public safety risks that we deal with are not just limited to what happens inside the jail. There is a decrease in crime on the street, but there's also increased vulnerability for people in the home. Shelter in place means that domestic violence victims, people who suffer from, sexual assault or child abuse in the home, ordinarily they can find some outlets for safety or for help when they go to school, when their abuser goes to work, when they go out for errands or grocery shopping. But right now, people are locked in the home. There's an increase in domestic violence and often a decrease in reporting about those occurrences. And so what we've been doing is finding ways to be creative and proactive about getting support and services to victims. We're being really active on social media. San Francisco just rolled out the ability for people to report crime using text messages to 911. Because if you're in the home with an abuser, it may not be safe for you to pick up the phone and make a call. And one of the things my office did, which we just announced yesterday, is we partnered with some local real estate groups and with other city agencies to provide 20 fully furnished apartments to domestic violence victims who need a safe place to stay during this crisis. And we're also going to be providing victims who move into those apartments with grocery cards so they can go and buy groceries and make sure they have food to eat for them and their kids.
But I guess part of the question I was asking is the mayor, you and the mayor the mayor didn't support you in your campaign, and now it looks
That's
like
true.
you've worked out some kind of working relationship with the mayor.
Well, Mike, I always said that politics.
That's strange practice for us here in Chicago.
San Francisco politics isn't that different.
We're still fighting the mayor's race for some reason.
San Francisco politics has some elements of Chicago politics for sure. People tend to dig battle lines here and remember old grudges. But the thing about it is, and I want to give the mayor credit for this, we had a department head meeting a couple of days ago where all the department heads were on a call with the mayor and her team. And the mayor said, this is not the time for politics. This is the time for action and for unity and for all of us to rise to the challenge that we're facing. And I think she's right about that. This is there are real people in serious need who are exposed to horrific violence. And we need to figure out ways to work together to help those folks. And I was really excited to be able to do that.
What about the police and the police union?
Yeah, we've had our challenges politically as well, but I will say,
sorry,
it's all right. For those who aren't familiar, the police union spent about $650,000 in attacks against me in the last 10 days of my campaign back in October and November of last year. And the police union in San Francisco is really disconnected from San Francisco politics. They're really disconnected, frankly, from the best interests of the rank and file officers that they represent. And we see that in the outcome of pretty much every major election and referendum where the police union has kind of dug in its heels. It's lost in everyone on supervisor races, mayor races, ballot initiatives, referendums. Every issue that in the last 5 or 10 years that they've invested a lot of money in, they've been on the losing side. So they're really disconnected from San Francisco values. But I'll say the rank and file officers and the command staff have really stepped up in this occasion, in this crisis. And I'm really proud of the relationship that I built with the chief of police. We have good communication. We don't always agree, but we know we've got to work together to do our jobs. And we know that in this moment, we've got to keep officers healthy. We've got to keep our priorities straight. And so, I've been really glad to see that the police are exercising their discretion to issue more citations, make less arrests. So we have less people being brought into the jail, less people exposing officers in the back of their squad cars to COVID-19, and really preserving law enforcement resources for the crimes that we're most worried about right now. I think the police have done a great job of helping to educate and inform local businesses about the rules that require many businesses to shut down or to keep limited hours. We really need to work together to respect the public health orders. We don't want to restrict people's civil liberties and civil rights, but we also want to make sure we're following the guidance of medical professionals.
Yeah, we want to get back to that question.
I was going to say, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk some more. We're with San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin talking about justice and law and COVID-19, and we'll be right back. Okay, this is WLPN LP Chicago Lumpen Radio. This is Hitting Left with the Klonsky Brothers, and we are talking on a Monday, just so that people know, we're talking on, right? What day is this? This is a Friday morning, and on a show that we recorded actually a week ago.
We just heard some great music, but I don't know what it was.
We don't know what it is. But we're here with Chesa Boudin, San Francisco District Attorney. I have a question for you, and that is one of the statistics that's come out and caused a lot of conversation here in Chicago is that somewhere around 70% of the deaths of COVID-19, the victims, have been African American. Is that a statistic that's reflected in San Francisco as well?
Well, San Francisco's demographics are really different than Chicago's. Our population as a city is only about 4% African American, and I'm really glad to be able to say that only 10 people have died in San Francisco. It's 10 too many, but it's far less than you see in other major metropolitan areas. So We do have, however, some of the same trends. We do see people who are poor, low income, people of color being affected disproportionately by COVID-19. And I think the reasons for that are not surprising. We know that folks who are low income, people of color, are less likely to have access to good health care, more likely to live in overcrowded housing circumstances or to be unhoused, and more likely to still have to go to work in person in order to pay the bills and have food on the table at night, as compared to people who are higher income or Caucasian, who are more likely to be able to work from home, have the space within the home to social distance, and have the resources to access medical care when they need it.
Have you seen this in like across the Bay in areas that have larger minority populations, say in Oakland or other places in the East Bay or down the peninsula some?
Yeah, so I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but I do know that across the Bay Area, we were one of the first regions in the country to declare a state of emergency, to issue shelter-in-place public health orders, and that early intervention and leadership across the Bay Area has really helped to contain the extent of the crisis. So as I said, in San Francisco, only 10 deaths to date. They are disproportionately people of color, but all across the Bay Area, we've done a much better job than other jurisdictions, like New York City, for example, or Chicago, at limiting the spread of coronavirus so far. And we're hopeful that the trend continues.
And that's because, why do you think? I mean, what explains the difference?
I think part of it is that we took steps earlier to limit movement. We declared a state of emergency before we had a single case of coronavirus in the city of San Francisco.
When the federal administration and the Trump administration specifically was telling people that this was not really a serious issue, it sounds like in California and in the Bay Area, people were taking it much more seriously.
That's exactly right. We've done in San Francisco, and I'm trying to do in my own administration with regard to the jail population and public safety issues, exactly what the Trump administration should have done from the beginning, which is to take guidance from and let public health officials and doctors shape public policy as we navigate this pandemic. In San Francisco, on February 25th, Mayor Breed declared a local emergency. On March 5th, almost about a week later, is when we had our first reported positive case of COVID-19. So we declared a local emergency fully a week before we even had a single case. And we issued a stay-at-home order on March 16th. So again, well ahead of what the federal government and many other jurisdictions across the country were doing.
Well, on that note, I mean, you've been a big supporter of Bernie Sanders. Am I correct?
I did endorse Bernie Sanders. He endorsed me. I am a big supporter of his, and I think his advocacy, not just in this campaign cycle, but also throughout his career for universal access to healthcare. It was a good idea then, and for folks who didn't get the importance of it and the value of it, there's nothing like this pandemic to make crystal clear why this country desperately needs universal health care.
And yet we have a Democratic Party leadership nationally, and including the Joe Biden. Joe Biden says if there was a Medicare for all bill that passed both the House and the Senate, not very likely, of course, he would veto it. So what do you say to that? I mean, where are you going now that Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race?
I'm focused primarily on trying to make sure President Trump is not president again for a second term. I'm happy to vote for any Democratic nominee, but I am frustrated with the way that this primary cycle went, with the way that many forces within the party teamed up against a candidate who has for decades espoused values, principles, and policies that we now see being adopted by many of the other candidates that we see coming into the mainstream, and that we see a more urgent need for than ever before in American history. It's frustrating, and it's particularly frustrating when the criticisms of Senator Sanders' public health proposals were primarily based on cost. People say it'll cost $1 trillion. You can never do that. And here, what we see happening.
Some change now, doesn't it?
Chump change. What we see happening now every day in the financial markets is the federal government pumping billions and trillions of dollars into failing companies who borrowed cheap credit so that they could do stock buybacks from their investors during a period when things were going well and the corporate tax cuts were increasing almost by the day. Now we're in an economic crisis where the little guy is getting squeezed. We have more people filing unemployment claims than pretty much at any point in American history. And meanwhile, the stock market is going up every day. Why? Not because the economy is good, not because people think that the engines of economic growth in this country are strong, but because bad news on employment numbers, bad news on bankruptcies is actually good news for Wall Street with this federal government, because they're going to bail people out no matter what.
Oh, that's a good point. So it turns out that the trillions of dollars that were given to the corporations, the bailout money, which might have been used to keep people in jobs,
or
to keep them working.
Yeah.
Instead, it wasn't used for that at all, and the workers have just been abandoned by businesses. I'm talking specifically about the bigger companies and bigger businesses. The small business guys have been they've been hurt very badly as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating to see Republicans fighting against unemployment benefits for folks who are literally living on the margins, and at the same time criticizing Democratic plans, Senator Sanders' plans for universal health care based on the price tag, and then, almost in the same breath, authorizing literally trillions of dollars in buybacks of mutual fund stocks, private equity groups. The message is loud and clear. If you're a poor working person, your well-being doesn't matter. Your healthcare doesn't matter. Your job security, your housing security, your food security doesn't matter. And if you're a corporation, you can take any risks you want with taxpayer dollars, with investor dollars, with the well-being of your employees, because if things go bad, the federal government's going to bail you out. That's why the stock market's going up, even as the economic news is worse and worse.
Can I know the immediate questions are the ones that you really have to deal with, but how are you thinking ahead? I mean, we're going to get over the medical issues here, but the social issues, the economic issues, the unemployment issues, the poverty issues are likely to last us for a long time after this epidemic is over, and that's going to be an issue for an office like yours and for justice issues. And how are you looking ahead to when we finally get past the epidemic and faced with an economic crisis?
Well, we are definitely trying to think long term as much as we can do in this time of crisis, Fred. We're trying to plan for what happens when the courts reopen, for what happens when crime trends start to change. And I think it's essential that we collectively organize around providing more of a social safety net, so that people who are thrown onto the streets, so that people who do lose their jobs don't resort to crime to survive. We don't want to see our jails filled up with people who are looting in order to feed their families. We don't want to see our hospitals filled up with people who are unhoused and getting sick in ways that are totally preventable if we use, for example, vacant hotel space to get people off the streets. We're trying hard in San Francisco to use all of the vacant hotel rooms to make sure that people who are unhoused have a safe, dry, warm place to go during this crisis.
Chesa, I want to. We don't have that much time left, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about you personally. You have to admit that it's pretty unusual for a person with your background to end up being a prosecutor. You grew up in a family, an extended family here in Chicago, when your parents were imprisoned, both of them, and you were raised by our friends Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, 60s radicals, members of the Weather Underground. You grew up in in a family environment and in a political environment that kind of didn't look favorably, to say the least, on prosecutors. And what kind of resistance did you get when you decided to run for that office? And has the attitudes, the kind of negative attitudes on the part of the left changed any, seeing the positive things that you've been able to accomplish?
Mike, as you know, my parents are supportive of their family and their kids almost to a fault. And I didn't get negative pushback from my family. They wanted to support me, and they wanted to see, what I was capable of, and they believed in me and my values and my work ethic. We're also in a unique moment in American history, and my family recognizes that. This is the first time in any of our lifetimes, and I say that even for you, Fred, and you, Mike, you've got longer lifetimes than I have here, but in any of our lifetimes, this is the first moment when there's a broad-based national consensus that the status quo approach to criminal justice is not working. We've got progressive prosecutors, people who are running for office and winning office in places like Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, and so many other jurisdictions, on platforms that are focused not on 3 strikes and you're out, lock them up and throw away the key, racist mass incarceration policies, but based on policies to reduce mass incarceration, to find ways to focus on root causes of crime, to treat drug addiction and mental health with clinics and with detox centers rather than with cages. And it's in the context of that national movement that I made the decision to run. And it's in the context of those kinds of campaign promises that I won my race.
In light of that, how concerned are you about, and I know you are, but in what ways are you concerned about the fact that in the last 3 years, the Trump administration's been able to fill judge positions around the country with really right-wing, anti-constitutionalist judges?
Until the COVID-19 pandemic, I was pretty certain that the single biggest and worst legacy of the Trump administration would be the impact on the federal judiciary. Trump has appointed more political ideologues, more unqualified, reactionary, young judges to lifetime appointments than ever in history. And it's going to have repercussions for for every area of American life and politics and policy for decades to come.
What do you tell? I want to get back to the question I was asking a minute ago. What do you tell, or what's your message to people on the left who consider themselves abolitionists, who want to see prisons done away with completely, and who might think that the reforms that you're fighting around are just insufficient measures?
I welcome criticism from the left. I encourage people to, create, political space for people like me to do more than we even imagine ourselves. So I'm really supportive of people who come from different views and who want to push us to go further than we've gone, or than we ourselves imagine is possible. What I will also say, though, is if you're an abolitionist, or if you have really sharp criticisms of the criminal justice system, you've got to help do the work of building the alternatives. We are dealing with situations every day in the criminal justice system where we have people who are very, very badly damaged and who have participated in some horrifically violent acts, many of them not just once, but repeatedly. Now, if you believe, as I do, that warehousing people in jails and prisons is not the answer, we've got to build other alternatives. We can't simply close down jails and prisons and put people who are violent or who are mentally ill and violent back on the streets with no support systems, with no alternatives in place. So do the work of building alternatives, and we'll happily continue to reduce the jail population.
You are a newlywed.
I am.
Yeah. I'm 51 years in it, but I can't wear one anymore because I broke this finger playing hoops.
Sounds like a good excuse to me. I don't know how your wife feels about that.
Well, I think she doesn't want to spend the dough to get a new one right now until
fair
times
enough.
get better. Yeah.
She's wise.
Yeah. How is married life for you now? Dealing with having to really it sounds like be married to your job at the moment. I'm sure you're going 24/7 on this thing.
Yeah, the same thing is true for my wife, though. She's really dedicated to her work. She's a researcher in multiple sclerosis, and she's got patients with tremendous needs all over the world that she's supporting and helping to find ways to stay fit, stay healthy, stay involved in some of the research projects that she's been doing, even despite this pandemic. So we're both working hard, probably harder than ever. And it's nice to have more time at home and be able to eat more meals together than was possible before the pandemic. I hate to cut this off, gentlemen, but I do have another call I'm scheduled for. I've got to jump off, but I
Chesa
always
Boudin.
appreciate talking to you guys.
Well, listen, we appreciate as busy as you are, we appreciate the time you've given us.
Likewise, good to talk with you. Stay healthy. Send my love to the family. Be well.
Yours. Yes.
And we'll talk soon. Take care, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, that was Chesa Boudin, the district attorney in San Francisco. We've kind of watched him grow up ever since he was a kid here in Chicago. He's Chicago's own, really, and our kids kind of grew up together with Chesa, and we are so proud of what he's been able to accomplish.
Michael, we have a couple of minutes here before we run out of time. So I'd like to get your reaction to some of the things that Chesa said, particularly about the differences between what he's been able to do in San Francisco and what's been going on here in Chicago and in other cities. Is this like an individual? Is it just that they've got a district attorney there who has a vision and an understanding of the kind of divisions in society and the inequalities and in society? Is that the fundamental reason, do you think, that they've been able to do what they're doing?
That's a really good question. I wish I had an answer to that. I am really disappointed in the pace of changes going on. Prisoners are being released from Cook County Jail. The governor has made some moves recently to look into some decarceration in the state system, especially down in Stateville Penitentiary. But to me, it's way too little, too late. And so I wish we could get Kim Foxx, Sheriff Dart, Tony Preckwinkle on this show, and the Governor Pritzker, and ask them that question. Like, what is taking so long, and why has Cook County Jail, for example, become the epicenter of coronavirus, where in places like San Francisco, admittedly that's a different situation in San Francisco for a lot of reasons.
It doesn't seem to me as if you absolutely need a radical critique of society in order to look at Cook County and say, looking at the release of prisoners from that hellhole, it should be done on a case-by-case basis. That it's just common. Really, it's a matter of common sense. It doesn't require some kind of radical notions in order to do this.
Well, Chesa pointed out some of the problems with it. Like, in order to release people in large numbers, you have to have an alternative. We've been struggling for years to build up an alternative to the juvenile detention center, for example, and to the Cook County jail system. We've been fighting for years here to get bail reduction and things like that. And the resistance has been great. Our Cook County State's Attorney, Kim Foxx, has really been under the gun. The kind of campaign that's been waged against her by not only by the police and the FOP, but by all kind of opposition.
But in a way, doesn't that just come with it comes with the territory? In other words, Chesa pointed out that the police in San Francisco pretty much did the same thing when he was running. Spent what did he say? $650,000 in the final weeks of the campaign. Certainly, the police were no friends of Chesa's campaign any more than they are supportive of State's Attorney Kim Foxx. And yet, he was able and successfully able to to combat that, and
Right.
not certainly not be dissuaded from pursuing what's a just course.
Yeah, I'm not trying to excuse anything that has happened here. I'm just saying that different conditions here, you know, the sheer numbers and the conditions inside the jails, and the fact that nothing's been done in the past under previous administrations to create the conditions for, you know, for example, for alternatives. I think that's seen as a hindrance. This takes leadership, you know, and on most issues we've had good leadership here in the state, as they have had in California at the governor's level, but you know, the sheer numbers here are tremendously different, and as Chesa pointed out, the racial differences and disparities, I mean, make it very difficult for a person like African-American leadership, like the mayor here, or like Kim Foxx, to do the things that I know that they would like to do. Fox has done some good things now. She's really limited, as Chesa has done, the numbers of people coming into the jail. But the question is now, seeing the lateness of the hour, is it even possible now to have large numbers of people released, as opposed to, you know, I mean, they could be released from jail, but they couldn't go home. They'd have to be probably given some kind of an alternative medical treatment, and starting with the victims of Corona. Anyway, I can't really answer that question, but I'm with you in saying that we need to put pressure. We need to put pressure at the grassroots level and demand that more be done. Otherwise, you know, the death toll is going to keep rising, and most unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think going to have to wrap this episode up.
All right, who we got next week? We got I think we got Krista Franklin finally.
We got some poetry. I will do some poetry.
Oh, we want to talk? Yeah, we want to talk to Krista about art and politics, and get her take on what's happening in the world of art and poetry during the time of Corona. And so we'll be back next week. Hope you all can join us then.
Okay.
All right, bro. See ya.
Later.